Hello and welcome back, everyone. It's just another day in the life as a military wife, and this is a special bonus episode I am working on for all of you guys. I'm super excited to share something that I love as a hobby, and I'm going to do that by introducing you to someone I have met. His name is Lorn Connor, and I met him through the same group I met Erica with, and we're going to just have some fun talking about Star Wars. So, all right. Lorn, you're muted, so let's just jump in and have fun. I've been a Star Wars nerd Oh yeah, Lorn, I can't hear you. You're muted. I
I know.
gotta yeah.
I'm just screwing with you.
Don't do that, Lorn. um okay, so fine. I'm unmuting you then. Ha, no wait, it didn't work. I think I unmuted you as you muted.
It's
Okay.
all right. I
All
can
right.
talk.
Okay. No, but so yeah, we've been talking a little bit. Most of my audience may not know this. I've mentioned it a little bit. They all know I'm a nerd and I love books, and I have mentioned in my so every year I do my year in books is my last episode for every year. And thanks to you, I got back to reading some of those Star Wars novels again and picking up ones I had not that you had been mentioning on prose streams and stuff. So, for all of you guys who are listening and maybe haven't caught my conversations with Erica, who's another military spouse, I met Lorn and Erica through WDW Pro, who is a fellow YouTuber, and he does a lot of really great stuff with Walt Disney and the parks. And he tortured poor Lorn by making him watch The Acolyte, and I supported you through those charity live streams. But Lauren knows so much more about Star Wars than I do. And for anyone who grew up with me knows that me admitting that is huge because I was the self proclaimed Star Wars expert of all of my friends growing up. And pretty much there wasn't anything I couldn't recite verbatim in my generation, only to find out that I'm a youngin in a few ways. I'm a little bit of a youngin, but then there's newer ones than me. I've met some younger Star Wars nerds, so I still know a little bit more than them. Anyway, Lauren, how did you get into Star Wars?
Well, there's really two phases, I guess, that I could say that I was involved with Star Wars. It was first when I was a little kid. I was born the year that the first movie came out, just a few months after it came out. So obviously, I was too young to see that in the theaters, and pretty young when I first saw it on VHS. I do remember seeing The Empire Strikes Back on VHS as a little kid. I remember at Christmas playing in the snow with my cousins, pretending we were on Hoth. But I do remember seeing Return of the Jedi in the theaters. I would have been just 4 years old. Um, so I was pretty young. And it made an impact on me. At that age, I was all about robots, so I was very much into the droids. And at that time, I was young enough that I thought that Darth Vader was a robot, and so those were kind of my main characters. As I grew older, though, I kind of let it slip by the wayside. I got involved in other things, and I sort of forgot about it until the revival of Star Wars began in the 90s. And it's a little fuzzy to me now. I don't remember if I encountered the Thrawn trilogy first or the X Wing computer game first. I think it was X Wing. And the way that I remember it was that I had bought the game because it was in a discount bin at a local electronics store. I had kind of forgotten about Star Wars. I wasn't really interested in it. My thinking was that I'd pick it up for cheap and I'd probably trade it for something else that I actually wanted. But once I got it home, I decided I was going to install it and see what it was about. And I sucked at it, and that made me mad. I considered myself a really good gamer, and I wasn't going to let this stupid game beat me. Um, but in the mission briefings for each of the missions, it was talking about all the stuff that I couldn't remember, that I had no context for. And so I think what happened was I ended up going back to the movies to try and figure out who all of these people they were talking about were and what it was all about. that kind of got me interested in the movies again, and I think then later I discovered the Thrawn trilogy and realized that there was more. That's kind of my fuzzy recollection, but that's how the second phase of my fandom began.
Okay. Yeah, well, that makes sense. Yeah, so I'm a 90s kid. So for me, running into Star Wars, I remember being like seeing it when I was a little kid. I told this to Hangry when he interviewed me for Pro's channel for the member thing. Um, I remember my aunt, I was, like, maybe 6 years old, babysitting me, and she's like, "What do you wanna watch? Do you wanna watch a movie?" And I'm like, "Yeah. Can I watch the teddy bears?" And she's like, "What teddy bear movie?" I'm like, "The teddy bears where they beat up the guys in the white armor." I wanted to watch Return of the Jedi because I've always been I don't know, I'm one of those little girls that always wanted teddy bears that could beat people up. So the Ewoks and Wookiees, like, I love Chewbacca. I'm like, teddy bears that can kick butt. Yep, that was me at like 6. And so it just kind of was always something I loved, and it was kind of my escape. Um, I think other people have grew up like my husband, he grew up with Lord of the Rings. He's a Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings guy, and we jokingly compete over which kid we can convert to our side of the fantasy-ness. I have our oldest son, thoroughly a Star Wars fan, but our oldest daughter is solidly a Lord of the Rings, so he's winning on that one. But, we've got 2 more kids to convince on which one's better. But I just love them, but some of those books, like the X-Wing series and stuff like that, I picked those up, and I was just too young for them when they first came out. The the Thrawn trilogy, I was way too young, I think, for that the first time I tried reading it. But the Jedi Academy, the Young Jedi Knights with Jason and Jaina and, Lobaka and all that, I ate that up. I loved that series and I now own most of it.
Yeah, so that was Kevin J. Anderson and Rebecca Muestra, I think is how you pronounce it.
Mhm,
They wrote those after he did his Jedi Academy trilogy. I was never a huge fan of those books. I always thought that Kevin was a great concept guy. He had interesting ideas, but I hated his execution for the most part. Um, I was going right along with the Jedi Academy trilogy right until they got to blobsticle races. And once you got there, I, I started judging him pretty heavily. Um, that said, though, he did have one book that I did like, which admittedly is kind of a terrible book. It was Dark Saber, but
mhm,
that one hit differently for me for some reason. I think because of the opening of the novel. It's cheesy, but I like it. You have Luke going back to Hoth, and he encounters the Wampa again,
mhm.
which is kind of dumb. He created some interesting lore for the Tusken Raiders that I kind of liked, and so I just sort of rolled with that one. Where I think Kevin really shined was in a lot of the creation of the backstory for the Old Republic. He was heavily involved with Tom Veitch with the Tales of the Jedi comics, and ended up creating an awful lot of lore that when it first came out, it seemed kind of silly. It was a little bit more of a more fantasy. It was leaning more into the fantasy side of Star Wars than science fiction.
Mhm,
It was almost a Conan in Star Wars kind of a thing. But he invented, along with Tom Veitch, Korriban, the Sith homeworld, all of the tombs there, most of the Sith lords of the ancient orders, the Masasi, which came from an idea
mhm.
of Lucas's, but all of the stuff that we kind of take for granted now, he laid a lot of the foundation stones for. So I've gained a greater appreciation for Kevin's ideas, not so much for his writing though. So
And
take that
see
as you will.
well, no, but I think that's really interesting because Star Wars is a multi-generational IP. Because I've heard Lou talk about watching it as a film student the first week it came out or, like, first day it came out. And Lou's another guy from the Pro channel, everyone. You guys all just need to go check out the Pro channel because they're freaking awesome. Um, but just between like you, Lou, me, and then another friend of mine, we're all 4 different generations of Star Wars fans. and now my kids are almost a fifth generation. And it's interesting because different things hit with different generations because the academy books were geared towards teenagers and I was a teenager when they came out. I really connected with those. But as I've gotten older, I like those characters and those books are fine, but the ones I go back and reread tend to be more like I love Courtship of Princess Leia. I know that's controversial, but I love Courtship of Princess Leia. I love I Jedi. I know that's controversial too. Um
So
but
I
also like
am
the
curious. Did you ever read the New Rebellion?
New Rebellion maybe once a while ago, but not I haven't read it recently. So refresh me on exactly who it was and what
It
covered.
was a one-off novel. It actually this came out before the prequels were released, but it starts with a bombing in the Senate that injures Leia. But it like I said, it's a one-off novel, but it picks
Yes.
up a lot of the story threads that were actually in those Young Jedi Knight novels.
Yes.
So it's sort of an unofficial ending to that series if you hadn't read it.
No, I read it when it came out. Or like not long after. I read it when I was a young teen, but I have not read it since. Because when you start talking about like the plots, I don't remember what happened in what book anymore. Because I used to read this stuff all the time, and well, then I went to college and had kids, and life happened. And I know the storylines, but I don't remember what book it was from. So when you said Dark Saber before, I was like, I'm not sure I read that. And then you start talking about what's in it. I'm like, oh no, yep, I have. So yeah, I do remember reading that, but it was like back when I was 13 or 14. I'd have to go back and reread it. But for me, the thing I always loved about Star Wars was the with the Jedi Knight, it's kind of a soft magic, but it's a hard magic system at the same time. It kind of balances between the 2. Do you know what I'm talking about when I say hard magic and soft magic?
Yeah.
Okay. I
Yeah,
figured
yeah,
you did.
absolutely. Yeah, it's this kind of goes into something I've talked about a little bit before in other venues, which is that part of the way that the EU had some problems was that, in my opinion, the Jedi's use of the Force, it's really it gives the Jedi just a slight edge. It gives them a very slight
Mhm.
bit of precognition. They have some telekinesis, but it requires effort, and that's about it. They do get some
Yep,
visions of the future, but they tend to be unreliable as well, which is good. You
yep,
know, you do have these characters that have awesome and fantastic abilities, but they're not enough to make them Superman. And one of the problems that the EU had was that in different authors' hands, they handled it completely differently. And there was an awful lot
yeah,
of power creep. And a lot of that came from Kevin Anderson. Um, to the point where it was getting so ridiculous that other authors started creating retcons and almost directly rebuking other authors to say, no, not this, this. And so they did have some consistency problems there, especially when the publishing was still a Bantam Spectra. When they moved
yeah,
to Del Rey Publishing, they started planning things out a lot better. They had much longer story arcs. They often had multiple authors that were working on the same series, but they would
mhm.
basically chart it out to make sure that they weren't stepping on each other's toes, and it made things a lot more consistent.
Yeah, I and that was something, as I was encountering things, there were contradictions, and so then I see people complain now about the contradictions in modern Star Wars versus old Star Wars, and I think the thing that bugs people more is that it feels like Disney Star Wars is even creeping more into the OP, like, MacGuffin territory that the EU is trying to correct from. And instead of making it logical, they're really turning it into a super soft magic system when it really was starting to develop into a hard magic system. And that just feels like it's regressing.
Um, I have a slightly different take. I think that There were a couple of problems with Disney's foray into the sequel trilogy. The main ones I think are that first they didn't understand the themes. Um, they tried to interpret the themes through a modern lens and wanted to talk about essentially social justice stuff without understanding that what you're really dealing with here is a mythological tale
Mhm.
that has its own tropes, and that's the whole hero's journey thing. But they kind of considered that passe and they wanted to move past that. The other issue, I think, is that besides not really understanding the themes, they only really kind of understood the spectacle. It's like they wanted to have what they would consider all of the blockbuster things that they think are what's appealing to the audience without understanding why people actually gravitated towards this. It was never because it was a special effects powerhouse. It was because we were drawn to the characters
Oh, yeah.
and their specific roles in the story. And if you don't have characters that appeal to the audience, they're not going to stick around. It's just going to be a popcorn flick and it's not going to have any staying power.
Yeah, exactly, and then, so that was yeah, they do, they miss well, and then they took some concepts and they exploded them. It's like they surface read some things, and they were like, "Oh, this was used before, here, we'll use it like this," and you're like, "Well, you didn't read far enough, people." The
Well,
thing that annoyed my husband, Last Jedi annoyed him to no end, and he's military. Um, he's always had issues with Star Wars because the way they Y he's like, "Nobody who ever worked on Star Wars feels like was ever in the military." Because the way the military units work, even in the original movies, or the prequels, there's just some major disconnects on how things are run and done, and he's like, "That that's okay, that's just fantasy, like, that's not really how structures would work." And so I keep trying to get him to watch, Clone Wars because I feel like whoever wrote that had a better concept on how military actually works. And so when Last Jedi happened, the part that offended him the most was when Holdo wouldn't listen to Poe. He's like, "You always listen to your CAG," because that's the position Poe is representing, it would be in our military, would be the CAG. And he's like, "You always listen to your CAG. You always keep your CAG in the loop. That's not how that works." And like that just He's like, "That this is just stupid. That's not how military works. That's not how structure works. That's not how command." He's like, "You don't do things that way for that reason." Like that anyway. And
well,
so it's always annoyed him.
yeah, I think there's a little bit of explainability to that in the original trilogy, though, which is that
Yeah.
the Rebel Alliance was a very loose structure that was made up of various cells from different planets,
Mhm.
people with shady backgrounds. It's not really what you would consider a traditional military, especially when you have
Exactly.
people taking off with equipment and going AWOL for
Oh, yeah.
quite long periods of time. That would never happen in an actual military structure. This is something that I think the EU handles pretty well, though, is that they directly address
Mhm.
after the victory at Endor, they have to transition from being an insurgency to a functioning government. And
Mhm.
there's all kinds of issues that come up with that. And that's especially explored in that Thrawn trilogy. Um,
Yes.
and that's something that I think Disney tried to address in their version of the expanded universe, but they got it all wrong. it's
Yeah.
they they magically had a new republic that was essentially as ubiquitous as the empire was when they were ascendant, but they were completely incompetent. They tried to just use the structure that existed and yet allowed the first order to germinate somewhere out in the unknown regions, uh,
Yeah.
and yet not deal with the needs of the people for 30 years. Realistically, that would never happen. The other thing that would
Oh,
never
yeah.
happen after a giant galactic civil war is that the new republic would not unilaterally disarm. That's just something that's not going to happen.
I know! Like yeah, no, that bugged me too. There's quite a few points for like, "Well, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense either." And just because yeah, it makes sense. In your explanation with the original trilogy, why they're so, fractured is because And I think that was one thing Disney did really well. With Rogue One, they did a really good job about showing how it was they weren't one team. They were all kind of contradicting each other and overlapping each other and not on the same page. And so I think that one movie, I think they hit out of the park. It was really well done. And
Yeah,
then they just lost it somehow.
I would argue that Andor is the same thing. Now, Andor was really difficult for me to get into because it has a very slow start, but
Mhm.
it is adult Star Wars, and it depicts things with weight and gravity. And what I love the most about it is that so much of the Star Wars fiction that has been developed. Originally, these were the stormtroopers, and the iconography of the Empire is based on Nazi Germany. They're wanting
Oh, yeah.
to evoke those images. But everybody's uncomfortable with that for understandable reasons. And so they have a tendency to write the Empire as buffoonish. They're clowns. They can't do anything right. And when you do that, you undermine your villains.
Yes.
Andor returned competency to the Empire, and that's
Mhm.
terrifying. When you
Oh,
have
yeah.
an evil regime that is capable of carrying out atrocities and they're competent and clinical, that's a scary villain, and that works for the audience.
Yeah, no, it really does, and I have not watched all of Andor. I've had issues with Star Wars ever since the 2nd season of Mandalorian ended. I'm gonna just admit I'm a Gina Carano fangirl and was not happy about what went down. Honestly, my husband really enjoyed season 2 of Mando because they they really hit some beats on that were really good. They brought in that, sniper, the Imperial sniper that, I oh my gosh, I forgot his character, but anyway, they brought in some really well-developed characters that showed the Empire was not just a bunch of buffoons, and they really could be a threat again, and I felt like that was going in a good direction to show maybe how the Republic could have gotten complacent and allowed that all to develop, but then it all kinda just blew up, and I don't know where the crap they're going with things nowadays. But I
They
really
don't they don't either. They don't feel bad.
oh, no, they don't, and the thing is, like, everyone's like, "Oh, Star Wars is dead, Star Wars is dead." I'm like, Star Wars has been dead-ish before, like, it petered out before. I don't feel like it's gonna be dead. I feel like it's gonna need it's on life support. I feel like it's gonna need a revival if it's gonna pull out another generation.
Well, I think the problem there is that I would technically agree with you in that it's been dormant before. But when it was dormant, they had captured the next generation of fans. When they had the revivals that would come, when the prequels came, when the EU came, they were capturing that next generation. After the prequels were done, they captured the next generation with the Clone Wars. And they were
Mhm.
always breadcrumbing these things so that it would appeal to the next generation. The sequels failed with that. They did not
Yeah.
capture the next generation. So the dormancy now, which technically isn't dormancy, they're still producing a lot of crap, but it is crap. The problem is now the substantial audience wants it to go away for a while. And that's never happened before. And if they didn't capture that youth movement, I'm skeptical that a revival is possible. I would love to see it, but I don't think it's going to be possible without a wholesale replacement of the management of Lucasfilm, a different ideological direction at Disney, and competent writers. I think the smartest thing that they could do would actually be to outsource it to third parties outside the company because honestly, that's who built a lot of the EU that led to the
Yeah.
revival that got us to the prequels.
Oh, yeah. No, that you're completely right. Honestly, I think there is a vote of no confidence, to steal a Star Wars phrase, and we do need new leadership at that. Honestly, I feel like some of the most enjoyable Star Wars stuff I've seen is the fan fiction. I feel like that's really where I because there was good fan fiction when I was a teenager, and I was part of that movement, but I feel like we feel so disenfranchised by the franchise that the fanfic movement has exploded and is now almost as major as it was, like, as the official stuff. Because, like, Star Wars Theory is putting together his stuff, and he's doing a great job with his, fanfic films that he's producing. I've seen some other stuff that's really great. I've read some pretty good fanfic, and I'm like, "You know what? I almost feel like we should just leave it to the fans."
Well, I mean, that's kind of the nice thing about being in a fandom is that you can pick and choose what you want to take and what you want to leave behind. There is such a large body of work here. I mean, you've got 47 years worth of stuff if you want to go and track it down and find it. So there's no lack of material, especially if you're new to it. Uh, the problem is, will it be a going concern into the future? And I think that's where the big question mark is now.
Yeah, it really is. I feel like the few parents like me who have Gen Alpha kids that are still fans and like, "It can be okay," might be their saving grace, but for us millennial parents with Gen Alpha, if they don't get enough of us to hold on, they might be hosed.
Well, I was pleased to hear that you told me that you're letting them listen to the radio dramas now. Is that right?
Yes, yes. They're listening to the radio dramas, they've seen the original trilogy, they've seen episode 1. We don't do a whole lot of TV and screen time in our house because, of just different things. Our lives are just really hectic and crazy. But we in all of the driving back and to and from extracurriculars and stuff like that, we're in the car, so listening to those radio dramas is perfect. And that's really something that's got my oldest very excited. He thinks they're fabulous, and they're just different enough from the movies. They add just an extra enough flavor that it keeps you interested, and it's got the soundtrack. Oh my goodness. Like, that's one thing I think people don't understand is that Star Wars hits on so many levels. I did costume design in college, and so the costuming is something I really love from the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy. I love the costumes. The music, my husband is a music person. His family are super musical, and those soundtracks are just we will play the soundtracks while the kids are doing their homework. They want to listen to the Star Wars soundtracks. And I'm like, "Dude, it's classical music." "Heck yes." It just happens to be freaking awesome Star Wars too. And so it just hits on so many levels, and I feel like Disney doesn't realize that it wasn't just the acting, or it just wasn't just the CGI, or it wasn't just the special effects. It was all of those layers that hit together to make this magical thing where you felt like you were in a different place.
Yeah, and it was a one man's vision. You know, it was not. George was always kind of an iconoclast, and he didn't want to be part of the Hollywood machine. That's why he wanted to own and control everything that he was creating. That made it his vision that nobody could screw with. And one of the problems with being a giant IP like this is that if you're not controlled by somebody that has a singular vision, you're just an IP, and they're going to stamp out product, and that's what we're
Yep.
getting. We're just getting
Yeah.
product. It's a lukewarm porridge is what I would describe it as, because it's done by committee. There's not
Yes.
any real genuine spark that's making it go.
Yeah, and I feel like that's something a lot of IPs are running into now. I mean, even Lord of the Rings, which as a 90s kid in the early 2000s, I thought there was no way to ruin Lord of the Rings. They're finding a way. So I feel like, yeah, when you lose that singular vision, when you lose that passion and that direction, it can devolve into chaos.
Yeah,
So
I think that you got to be careful what you wish for. You know, I think we all sort of wanted the Star Wars revival, and I think that we've had a few signs that there is some good product that can be put out. but a lot more damage has been done. And I think in some ways it would have been better to just let it gracefully wind down and enjoy what we had. But what we have now
Yeah.
is a mess.
Yep. Well, that's what there's a joke in my family that the sequel trilogies don't exist. They're not allowed in our house, they're banned. But it is what it is. Honestly, thank you so much, Lauren, for doing this. I've really just enjoyed having this chat with you. I love Star Wars. It's really interesting because I do run into a lot of people in the military who are Star Wars fans and into a lot of these different IPs. And it's because it does invoke a sense of like patriotism and camaraderie and hope. And that's something that the military community, I think, really yearns for and looks for. Um, but it's also just fun to take a break from all the military content sometimes and just talk about something I love. So I want you to give you a chance to shout out what you're doing. I really love your channel and tell my listeners about what you're doing so they can check you out.
Sure. I do appear on WDW Pro's channel quite frequently. There's a show that I do on there with Lou Wasserman's Ghost and Hangry Table called The Genre Guys, where we bring up and watch classic movies and discuss them so that we can bring them to a wider audience. We try and hit things that are great movies but are maybe lesser known, so that hopefully we can make people aware that there's stuff they haven't seen so that they don't have to go watch the current Hollywood slop. I appear on Toonie Town TV on Thursdays. My X channel is Lorn Connor, and my YouTube channel is Lorn Connor 9030. There, I have been reading various Star Wars novels from the old EU. So, if you are a person who likes audiobooks and has an interest in Star Wars, you can go find me there.
Thank you so much. And yeah, I listen to your audiobooks. The book you're reading those books, some of the books you're actually reading were never turned into audiobooks that I've been able to find. So that I think is a fabulous resource for people who maybe don't have time to sit down and read any of the old expanded universe, but want to kind of delve into it. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, and I would encourage people, if you do like these novels, they're still in print. You can go and you can buy them, and if you like them, and I encourage you to do so. If you like Star Wars, they should be in your library.
Oh, yeah. I have been collecting them, for a couple of years now, and every time we go to book sales and I find some, my husband knows I'm gonna buy them, and, we've got a good collection, but you actually I'll link it in the description for this episode, but you, pointed out the chronology to me, and I didn't know about that previously, so I've gone and purchased some. You can actually get some of these books even for a penny, people. I have found Star Wars books for a penny. You just have to pay a shipping, and I don't know why they're selling for that cheap. Now that I've said it, I'm probably ruining it for myself, and I'm never gonna find a penny novel again. But yeah, there's some really great old EU stuff out there, and I will never call it Legends.
Yeah, I was
But
fortunate enough to be able to pick up all of the novels before they rebranded them, so none of my stuff has got the Legend stamping on it.
yay. Some of mine does, but a lot of mine don't. So, um yeah, even if it doesn't have legends on there, it'll be fine. But if it has legends, just know that means it's probably the good stuff, people.
Yep.
Yep. Okay, well, thank you so much, Lauren. Yeah, I'm just getting all tongue-tied today. It's, it is what it is. But anyway, thank you for coming on. Thank you for having the conversation with me. I really enjoyed it. I hope everyone checks out your channel. And as always, everyone, let's be the good that we want to see in the world. I'm your host, Sam Wolf, and you've been listening to Life of a Military Wife. Okay.